bring in our next speaker. We have Lawrence Davies. Lawrence is a solicitor from Equal Justice and is involved in the case for Belly Mujinga. So Lawrence, I'm happy to hand over to you.
Thank you. I act for the family of Belly Mujinga. Last week, we wrote to the Prime Minister calling for public inquiry into Belly's avoidable and tragic death. If you're interested, a copy of our letter to the PM and more details about Belly's case can be found at our Equal Justice Solicitors website. The harsh working life and tragic death of Belly Mujinga serves as a microcosm for racism in the UK. For context, all of the British social attitude surveys in recent years show that 25% of the British public admit to being very or a little racist. So it follows that up to 25% of your work colleagues may be biased in the way they make decisions or treat BAME workers. In short, there are over 1 million incidents of racism at work every year. That's 8 racial incidents at work every working minute. 8 every minute. To make matters worse, based on all indicators, racism has been on the rise and has been increasingly overt since the Brexit campaign. In 2017, the TUC produced a report, I suspect ironically, Is Racism Real? It found that 37% of BAME staff suffered race discrimination at work and 16% suffered harassment at work. This year, the TUC produced another report entitled Dying in the Job, not ironic, which found that twice the level of BAME staff were suffering harassment at work compared to 2017. It also found that 15% of the harassed staff left their jobs as a result of that harassment. But while racial harassment has doubled at work from 2017 to 2020, regrettably, the ability to obtain justice for that harassment remains out of reach. In fact, only 43% of victims of racism report back to their employer, and 99% of them lose their race grievances. So the harsh truth is that only 1% of race victims formally complain about racism at work, and only 1 to 2% of those win their claims at the tribunal. So the small percentage that win seldom receive adequate compensation. The highest award for racism at work last year was about £30,000. Tribunal awards are often pitifully low, and they definitely don't financially deter racism at work. On a more positive note, anti-discrimination work has more recently had and continues to have the benefit of the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter movement. The question then is for us today, have these movements made a difference to outcomes in the UK? And the answer is sadly no, or not yet. For context, before Me Too in the US, only 6% of victims of sexual harassment formally complained about that conduct. After they raised a litigation fund of $20 million, they achieved a 10% formal complaint rate, an increase of about 4%. In the UK, believe it or not, only 1% of sexual harassment victims formally complained before Me Too, and only 1% complain of sexual harassment post Me Too, because we don't have a litigation fund. It means in practice today, 99% of all discriminatory incidents that happen at work are never formally challenged, which means a discriminatory situation at work doesn't change and isn't likely to. So it's in that context, is it really any surprise that when Belly and her Black African work colleague Motolani had suffered racial abuse from customers on concourse of Victoria Station, are we surprised that happened? Is it really any surprise that Belly herself was suffering racial discrimination at work and being harassed by her supervisor prior to the assault? On the 10th of February 2020, Belly issued a race grievance against her supervisor, but her employer, Govia Thameslink, appears to have ignored it. Her supervisor did not ignore it and retaliated against her. It's important to note Belly wasn't on the road to work outside on the concourse at Victoria Station on the 21st of March, the day on which she was assaulted. She was supposed to be working in a ticket office. She was forced to work outside by that supervisor about whom she'd complained of racism and who also knew of Belly's health conditions. Belly wasn't given a mask or adequate PPE, and she'd been told she couldn't use her own mask outside. After being assaulted, the supervisor and manager forced Belly to work outside again for several hours on the concourse, even though she begged not to. Days later, Belly developed COVID symptoms. It was only after a medical consultant, though, contacted Govia demanding that she be shielded, that the employer agreed that she should shield and need not attend work. And this is important. Govia never reported the coughing, spitting COVID incident to the police. And that meant the vital DNA and CCTV evidence was lost because of the delay. Belly tragically died on the 5th of April 2020, and it appears that her black life did not matter. A few months after Belly died, her supervisor, about whom she had complained of racism, allegedly told staff, "Only stupid people die of COVID." Belly was the main breadwinner in her family and earned about £25,000 a year. She's a frontline worker who was part of our private-run public rail service. She worked for a business which in 2019 recorded 1.8 billion in revenue. However, Belly's employer did not provide her with proper PPE, did not address the racism at work she suffered, and did not inform the police about the assaults on her on 21st of March. Being in low-paid work, Belly had less power. It's important to recognise that BAME workers disproportionately work within the low-wage economy. You probably all know that women workers are paid 18% less than men. What you should also know is BAME workers are probably paid 37% less than white workers, although a study last week suggested the figure for London-based BAME workers was 24%. I personally did a case where the difference, the BAME pay gap was 90%. But to understand the scale of unequal pay, you must consider the Birmingham City case. In that case, tens of thousands of low-paid women who worked as carers, cleaners and cooks sued Birmingham City Council for equal pay for equal value of work against binmen and street cleaners. They won 1,200 million in compensation. That's 1.2 billion. So society says women are doing well and there's only an 18% pay difference. The reality is that the actual public sector equal pay debt owed to women workers is about 140 billion pounds. So if you paid 140 billion pounds to public sector women workers today, then they could wake up tomorrow morning still being 18% behind in pay for that day's work, but the 140 billion pounds of wealth transfer would radically change their lives and improve gender equality. The total equal pay debt owed to women today is about 1 trillion pounds and rising. It is likely that the BAME equal pay debt is up to 300 billion pounds in total. If you transfer that 300 billion pounds currently due to BAME workers today, then tomorrow we can realistically talk about eradicating the BAME pay gap going forward. We will have taken our first real steps towards race equality at work. But until then, while that 300 billion is withheld, we remain decades away from race equality at work. And with unequal and lower pay, life is harder on every level, from financial security to healthcare, to housing quality, to education, to the amount of influence you have, and whether or not you're heard, or whether your life matters. The 300 billion pounds, of course, doesn't begin to address the psychological damage done to black workers by race discrimination. Okay, the government will probably say they can't afford race equality at work, but the reality is we've just committed £1 trillion of public funds to tackle the COVID pandemic. So it's affordable if race equality has the same priority as the COVID pandemic. We need race equality at work now. Please support the public inquiry for Belly. Please also sign our petition seeking justice at Belly, for Belly, at change.org. Thank you for your time.